Nancy Pelosi goes on vacation and leaves the iron on the cat. We have some Tinaless numbers today. And Mike Brady dies, and Greg, Peter, and Bobby decide to evict Carol, Marcia, Jan, and Cindy on today's Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. I'm tired, boss. I'm Charles Ray Dawson, Associate Broker at ProStar Realty. This is the Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. And I've just spent the last 2 hours trying to figure out Washington, D.C. So, last year in the middle of the COVID, we had a moratorium put on evictions and foreclosures if the individual tenant or borrower could not pay their rent or mortgage because they were impacted by COVID. Either they lost their job or weren't able to go to work or whatever. And it seemed like a pretty good idea at the time. And then it got extended, and then got extended. And eventually somebody stepped up, and it was, I think it was the Alabama Association of Realtors and some landlords, and sued in D.C. court or U.S. District Court, forgive me, to say, hey, Center for Disease Control doesn't have the authority to do this. This is a power invested to the Congress, not to the executive. And they sued back in May, and that was found to be correct by that particular judge. And then the judge held off on implementing that until the Supreme Court of the United States got a chance to look at it. And that happened all the way back there in June. So, was it June? Yeah, June 29th. I got notes here for just such an occasion because it gets a little detailed and complex, and we've been trying to figure this out. So, back in June 29th, Supreme Court rules in favor and basically just says, yeah, that's not a CDC thing, that's a Congress thing. And there was two separate rulings on that. The first one says, yeah, it's a CDC. It's not a CDC thing. It's not an executive function of the executive. Remember, 3 branches of government, for those of you who aren't paying attention back in junior high. So, one branch, Supreme Court of the United States, sits there and says, no, it's not an executive issue. It's not our issue. It's not an executive issue. It's Congress's issue. And you can tell where we wind up there. Because they kick it out. All right. And on June 29th, they inform, the country, yeah, this is something Congress has to do. The CDC can't mandate this. But the second part of that ruling was whether or not they were actually going to hold the stay. And legalese thing going whether or not they were going to implement this finding. And at that point, one of the justices, Kavanaugh, switches his vote. All right, he jumps from one side to the other. And he says, yeah, but we only got 30 more days. All right, we got one more month. This is going to expire on July 31st. So, yes, it's unconstitutional, and yes, it's something that the Congress needs to do. This is a Congress thing. But I am willing to let it play out until the end of the month and give Congress a month to get this straightened out. And spend some of the money that Congress had allocated to deal with this. And they didn't actually, to help people, tenants and landlords work together and get this all straightened out. And I did a podcast on that. And I did a podcast last week stating this is going to happen. All right. I called it the apocalypse. Here it comes. Well, it came. And it's still here. Because on Thursday, the 29th of last week, as I was literally pushing play on my podcast, all right, to pop it out there to the world, and you guys were watching that video, the Biden administration, sent a little postcard over to Congress and Nancy Pelosi, and basically shorthand said, hey, Nance, I know you're planning on going on vacation for the next month, but you got this thing on your plate. And you're supposed to take care of it, and you haven't. Now, he sent that over to her on Thursday. And apparently, on Friday, Nancy Pelosi pops up and goes, I saw a record that they actually they went down to the Congress, all right, the House of Representatives. Remember, there's two branches of Congress here. You got the House, you got the Senate. And as you know, Speaker of the House of the Congress, she gets to go out there and put votes up, and she asked for a simple: does anybody here object to us unanimously supporting the moratorium? And one person popped up and said, yeah, I think we should talk about this. No, I do not. I'm not going to say yes to a unanimous. And apparently, because of the way Congress works and stuff like that, is that people can put up there and do, hey, basically it's like, does anybody object if we do this? So she goes up there and says, just like, does anybody object to this? And somebody raises their hand and goes, yeah, I object. Boom, done. She then turns around, gets on, goes out to the press and says, well, it's too late. The Republicans shot us down here in the House. We can't get anything done without the Senate. The Senate's already taken off. We're done. This all happened on Friday. So we rolled into the weekend without any resolution to the moratorium ending, right, for the apocalypse coming. That was like the last chance to avert things. And it got so bad that on Sunday morning, on the Sunday morning talk shows, AOC gets on the talk shows, and she's like out there calling out Pelosi, and she's like sitting there going, you can't blame the Republicans on this. You had an entire month to do something, and you decided to do something on the last working day of the month. At the last second, you did it the least possible way of doing it, just so you could say you did something, and we're dead. So that rolls into Monday morning, and Monday morning kicks off, and everybody's talking about what's going to happen for the first, So for the first 24 hours or so, all day Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Biden administration, CDC is saying, hey, SCOTUS says we cannot do this, all right? SCOTUS says this is not on us. This is something Congress needed to do. And they talked about that all day Monday. News started picking up. You saw more and more news on, CNN was doing articles about this. People actually started noticing that this just happened over the weekend because nobody was listening to the Ray for the last month or so. And so on Tuesday, the CDC and the White House comes out with another statement going, yes, we're still having a moratorium. We know Congress told us we can't do this, but we're still going to do it. But we're only going to do it in selective counties. All right, counties that may be impacted by COVID, the Delta variant. So that's where we were at on Tuesday, because they're going to reduce the scope of the implementation. It's not nationwide. It's only in 80% of the counties that hold 90% of the population of the United States of America. So there's 10% floating around out there free. And I've not found the chart to see which counties get impacted and which counties get down. And, came up several times and just said, hey, yeah, we can't get this thing done. Or we don't have the power to do this, but we're going to do it anyways. And here's the punishment if you do what we don't want you to. And it will get overturned by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's going to tell us, no, that we can't be doing what we're doing already. Right? But by then, we'll be able to get more of the money out. Now, getting the money out to people seems to be a really big hang up on this thing. And people are always, talking like the money's there. Right? But it's just not getting implemented. Right? There's $46 billion. That's billion with a B. Right, that got allocated by Congress to help the landlords and the tenants out in this situation. Since then, $3 billion of the $46 billion have actually been passed out. In New York State, with 8 million residents, all right, hasn't allocated out dime one. And a big part of this problem is it's really fine for somebody to go and say, hey, spend some money. But the government requires policies and the government requires procedures. And you want to make sure that people are getting the money who need to get the money. And people who don't need to get the money don't get the money. And you can't just hand a state a huge chunk of change and say, yeah, disperse this. They could call up the National Guard and get a couple helicopters and fly over cities and just throw it all out. And that could almost be considered a distribution plan. That might actually be considered a better distribution plan than New York State has. But if you've been paying attention to the news this week, Cuomo's got his own problems. Honk, honk. So that's where we're at today. We're in this wonderful little constitutional limbo where the Supreme Court has told Congress, you need to do something. Congress has said, nah, we can't do it this month. Maybe we'll get back to it next month. Oh, and by the way, Pelosi said several times, oh, the CDC needs to do this. The CDC needs to do this. And the CDC and the Biden administration says, no, we actually can't. But something has to get done. So they decided to step up and do something. And that's where we're at today. And I'm tired, boss. I'm spending way too much time on this thing today trying to figure out exactly what's going where and who's being impacted and stuff. And there's a reason why, you know, reporters get paid money to do nothing but live in Washington, D.C., trying to decipher the craziness that comes out of that little magical palace. So, anyway, so the long story short, when it comes down to the moratorium is, don't know. Really don't know where we're at. Really don't know where we're going. Very last bit of news that I heard just last night. There was another lawsuit against the CDC going to the exact same judge that overturned this back in May, said, no, you can't do this. They went right up to her again, or him again, and said, hey, you know, they're doing it. They're doing it again. And I have not heard what's come out of that. All right? I'm recording this at, what time is it? 12:59, Thursday, the 5th. So something could be hitting Twitter right now this very second. I don't know, but I got to get this thing out today. So that's that. So we got the numbers coming up, and Tina was not on not doing her gig on Monday. I don't know why, but I just know that we were off today on that. So I got my normal numbers, and then we're going to go into section 3, and I'm going to jump straight from one to the other into section 3, where we're going to cover title and escrow, and what the hell these people are and what they do and why they're very, very important and honestly the unsung heroes of real estate that nobody ever hears of, but they're really keeping the lights on and the wheels together. So here we go. Now the numbers on August 4th, 2021. Our actives this week are 6,584, which is up 192 from the week before and still setting a new record for this year. Of the 6,584, 2,654 of them are new ones that just came on this week, which is up 214 from the week before. Our pendings are at 1,954, which is up 139 from the week before. And our closings for this week have been 2,651, which is up 634, showing the how we always spike at the end of each month. Our under contracts looking for backups are at 1,162, which is down 9, and our closings with buyer's contingencies are at 100. First time we've seen 3 digits on that number, but it's only up 1 from the week before. Coming soons are at 982. Section 3, title and escrow. Last video we covered section 2, which was discussing the finance. We saw a whole bunch of jobs that the buyer suddenly had to do to work and play well with the lender and get the loan application going. And now we're going to go into the unsung heroes of the entire transaction, the title and escrow people. This is going to be a relatively long one because I get quite in depth on it. I also get into some of the history of why we do the things that we do. I worked for a title company starting in 95, 96 or so. It was a part-time job or a temporary job. I was a dispatch driver. And ironically enough, I realized I'm wearing exactly the same kind of shirt that they made me wear back in the day. I had to wear a white shirt. The company I worked for, Associated Title, actually had a shirt service. So we'd come in every week and pick up 5 shirts, and then we'd throw them on and look clean and presentable. One of the problems was I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps at the time, so I started growing my hair out. And at a certain point, I had hair down past my shoulders, and I'm driving a Toyota Tercel around Salt Lake City back in the day, running loan documents and deeds and whatnot back and forth between all the various offices and title, and delivering them out to some places, commission checks and whatnot. And that is something I never got away from. I mean, I can't tell you the last transaction where I didn't wind up having to run something across town, just like the good old days. But it's just that was my entry-level job, working for a title company. From then, I went on and went on to First American Title, started working for Fatco back in the day in the IT department. And during that, I got, some other spots over at Associated, I was over in title for a little bit. The First American is over in escrow for a little bit. So I know how this sausage gets made. So this is why we're going to go into a lot of detail on this for a very short, less than a page worth of instructions. Right. So let's take a look. Let's take a look what the contract says. First thing the contract does is it calls out in section 3A who the escrow company is going to be. This is supposedly supposed to be a buyer's choice. All right, the buyer has a choice of escrow company. In reality, a lot of the times the seller has already started work on title work, especially if it's a probate or an estate sale. And because they already have title open, it's just easier to go with whoever the seller's title company that they're working with is. Some sellers will be really adamant they want to use their escrow company because of whatever they already got going over there. Sometimes one party or the other will have some sort of association with the escrow company. But this is normally called out in the contract. The buyer's agent is going to be writing down. Most buyers or sellers don't have a favorite escrow company, but all real estate agents do. I like to use it that this is your home field advantage. All right, if you have a relationship with an escrow officer, you want to be using her, especially because you know their communication is good, their problem-solving skills are good. When I just got started as a real estate agent, since I had all this experience in title and escrow, working for a title company, and more importantly, drinking with escrow officers and title officers after work, I knew what to look for in a good title officer and a good escrow officer. So I went out and interviewed a lot of people and just met with them and whatnot, and came up with people that I really like. And that's why I use Heather King at Equity Title. This is a free advertisement. Heather is awesome. She's been with me from the beginning. I go back to her every time I possibly can. And if you're a real estate agent looking for a decent escrow officer, get a hold of Heather King over at Equity Title. She is awesome. All right. Non-paid advertisement later. Let's continue on. All right. Once the title is open, escrow is open, you're going to send the earnest money check over to escrow. I myself like to hand deliver it, especially if I don't know the escrow officer. I like to get like eyeballs on them, maybe have a little introductory talk. This used to be really easy to do a couple of years ago, and then the last couple of years it's like nobody has time to talk to anybody. So I'm going in there, I'm walking in there with a copy of the contract, my earnest money check. Hi, I'd like to talk to the escrow officer. Oh, she's busy. And you are? Well, somebody who's probably not going to be using you again after this transaction, but every once in a while you do get a really good escrow officer who knows her stuff, and it will take that extra time to meet with you. You can let them know about any potential issues that could be coming up, and the good ones will take that time because they know that little investment of time talking to the real estate agents at the beginning of the transaction will save us days of heartache later on. All right, so agents, if your escrow officer doesn't pick up the phone when you call, go find yourself another one like Heather. So once title is open, they're going to have the title plant start running a title report. All right. They're also going to send you over, and let's go through this contractually. All right. First things first, title investing. The buyer is going to take title as determined before close of escrow. All right. And title is the way your position goes on the deed. Hold on for a second. Let me show you some graphics I made up on this. Okay, let's talk about ways to take title. See the asterisk on the end? We all know what happens when Ray starts taking asterisks or makes little asterisk things. I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant. And this is one of those things if you really are going to want to talk to your attorney, accountant, and somebody else on this thing, because there are multiple ways to screw yourself up by taking title wrong in a property when you're taking with somebody else, right? If you're taking it by yourself, it's just you, the individual, it's going to be your title, all right? But if you are married or buying with somebody else, you're going to have some issues here, right? The 4 ways to take title, all right? It's community property, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, community property with right of survivorship, and tenancy in common. All right. So the main thing to remember here when you start breaking this down, all right, is if you are not married to the individual you are co-owning the property with, you're going to be seeing the word tenancy in the way you take title. All right. If you are taking it as a married person, it's going to be some sort of community property. This is Arizona. We are The way we take title to property is based on the fact that we are in a state that used to be part of Spain. And when Spain brought the Western concept of land ownership to these lands, they used Spanish law. Spanish law had community property, which meant if the husband died, the wife, the spouse, had a right to the property. All right? That's why we're a community property state. Right. The two difference that makes it up on this one, a community property, is as a community property itself, the spouses have a half interest in the property that they can will separately to other people when they die. Right? Right of survivorship means that if one spouse dies, the surviving spouse gets everything. Right? So let's break this down a little bit easier for you. All right? This is a story of a lovely lady. All right, and she was raising 3 very lovely girls. And we had this gentleman down here who had 3 sort of schleppy sons, all right? But they decided to get married. All right, and let's give them names, all right? We got Mike down here, all right? Mike has his 3 sons from a previous marriage. We don't know what happened to the wife, all right? He could have axe murdered her. It could have been a divorce, whatever. I don't think the television show actually broke that out, all right? And we got Carol over here, and she's got her 3 daughters. And Mike and Carol decide to get married, right? They both bring in assets from it, all right? Previous money from the previous divorces or the insurance money from the spouse's death, whatever. And they decide to buy a house jointly. Now, how they take title, lets us know what happens to that property after one of them dies, right? Because let's say Carol, using the insurance money from her husband's death, right, or however she got that money, wants to make sure that that money goes to her 3 daughters at the end of the day, right? Mike wants the same thing. In this particular case, they would probably just be taking this as community property. And as community property, when Carol dies, all right, her daughters, Marcia, Jan, and Cindy, all right, get her half as heirs of her estate of the house. Split 3 ways, that would be, what, a 1/6 apiece? Right? On the flip side of this, right, with Mike, he's got Greg, Peter, and Bobby. All right? So his half would go to Greg, Peter, and Bobby. And that's what you get with community property. Now, in a community property with right of survivorship, remember that right of survivorship means if the other person dies, I get everything. If Carol here finally gets sick of Mike and his snoring in his sleep and smothers him with a pillow, all right, she gets the whole house. And she can disperse the house any way she wants to. So she could, she could disperse the house just to her 3 daughters, Marcia, Jan, and Cindy, leaving Greg, Peter, and Bobby out in the cold. This is why it's important for people to come in and to realize how they're going to do this before they actually buy the house. Now, I know Mike and Carol were very smart people. Mike was an architect and whatnot. He probably had seen some sort of land and law problems before, so he probably had this thing pretty locked up, right? But you never know. One of those big questions I always wondered when I watched this show. And this is something that's actually happens today. Now, let me tell you one of those little great horror stories, all right? My mother-in-law, my sainted mother-in-law, hi Mom, is telling me the story the other day of where she had one of their neighbors was being forced to leave their house out in Sun City Grand because the neighbor's husband had died. He had owned the place before, she marries, they live happily married for quite some time, and then he dies. But the wife was never on the title. All right? And since the wife was never on the title, the kids of that family, actually I guess in this case it would be this side, right, decided they wanted to sell the house and take the money. And next thing you know, that woman who'd been living out in Sun City Grand, who had just suffered the death of her husband, suddenly has to pack up and move back to like Oklahoma or Arkansas or one of those states, Midwest states that nobody wants to live in. Because the kids, the heirs of the husband, had decided they wanted the house. There's several very, very simple ways to do this. Now, if the husband had wanted to make sure that that land, all right, let's say Mike here owned the house before Carol comes in, all right, he marries Carol, but he really wants to make sure that that house and all of its, and the value of that house goes to his 3 sons. He could have just simply written in the will that the house inevitably goes to his 3 sons, but Carol here gets what's called a life lease. And a life lease means that Carol had the right to live in the property until she died or decided to move and give up the lease. Right? Very simple thing. This is something your attorneys can do for you when you're writing up the will. Just because you wrote up the will back in 1992 doesn't mean that it's up to date with your newfound stuff. So, little point there. These things is something you need to look at, something you need to address, all right, as your life changes and whatnot. Me and my wife got together. We got mortgaged before we got married. Right? We took the house in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Right? If either one of us had died, the other person would have gotten all of the house. Right? None of our heirs, right, would have had a claim to that because we had it in joint tenancy with the right of survivorship. If we had gotten into a tenancy in common, right, and I had died, then Karen had the right, or my parents at that point, being my heirs, would have had the right to come after for their half of it, even though I know they wouldn't do that. But it just makes sense to figure that out beforehand, because you never know the way way things are going to go later on in life. So once again, that is one of those really, if you're in a situation like this, you're going to want to talk to your attorney and your tax accountant on that, see how that's going to affect these things. So this is not something that your real estate agent can tell you. This is not something that escrow is going to tell you. We're all going to say the same thing. Here's a piece of paper explaining everything. If you have any questions, call an attorney. All right, so that handles title. Next part that we got going on is the title commitment and title insurance. All right, title commitment is a document that is created by the title department of the escrow company. Some people get confused because we use title company, escrow company. Some companies are called so and so in title. Some places are called so and so in escrow. It's all pretty much the same thing, but it's two separate jobs, right? The title commitment side of it and the title insurance is the title department, and your title officer is going to research the property in hand. They're going to go through and discover whether or not there's any liens on the property, whether or not the owner of the property is actually the true owner of the property, and whatnot. And they're going to make a title commitment. It's going to be a document, also known as a prelim, which is going to come out and say, hey, yeah, here's the property, and this is the this is the loan amount, or the loan that's still on the property that needs to be paid off for title to get transferred. And then they kick that over to escrow, and the escrow assistant is going to sit there and I just said escrow assistant because she's the one who's really going to do all the work, right? The escrow officer is handling stuff, but it's really the escrow assistant that's going to be calling for the payoffs. Some of the bigger companies have entire departments that do nothing but clear files and handle all the payoffs and everything like that. So, but they're going to call and find out, okay, XYZ Bank, you have a lien on the property for X amount, what's the payoff if we close on this date? Right? So that's their main thing on this, right? And the reason for this is so you can issue what's called title insurance. And it's a title insurance policy, not to be confused with home insurance, right, that protects either the buyer or the seller from any problems that come up. And more importantly, it protects the lender. And it sounds weird, but the lender is not going to loan money on a property that may eventually disappear underneath them and their lien goes nowhere. So that's how title is going to start doing the research. And honestly, this is a really, really cool job. This is something I wanted to be as the first department, when I started driving cars and I saw what they were doing. It's like, oh, wow, I want to do that for a living. So let me do a little deep dive on here and let you show you exactly, how these things all work out. So a guy I know just moved to Vermont. And he is a historian, or amateur historian, and a real serious researcher. So he bought a very old piece of property, as most property is. And he went down to the city recorder instead of the county recorder like we do out here. And he started looking at original warranty deeds. Now, nowadays we record all the warranty deeds at the title, or at the county. And it's a individual piece of paper that is recorded, but we still use the same terminology, book and page, right? This one right here is the actual original book with the original writing. And he opened it up and he's looking at that. And let me show you this next screen right here, because I'm going to blow up a little bit on this. All right. Right? This is the way the original warranties were done. All right, and handwritten out in very fine Spencerman script, the way people used to be able to write before everybody wanted to be a doctor. Right? And you can recognize some of the terminology on this. Right? This is the actual document that is changing ownership of a property from one person to another. In this particular case, it's going from a Fred Willard to Henry Underwood and wife. Notice the little plus and wife right there. Right? And this calls out, you know, who it is and what's being transferred. Right down in this bit right here. All right. It says, talking about the property, it being 2 acres and 5/6 of land with the buildings therein, and to a part of the farm purchased by the said Willard of the said Underwood, and is bounded as follows. Right? Now listen, this is a legal description that they use at the time. On the north by a certain brook running across the farm of said Willard. On the east by the highway leading from Townshead to, looks like Newfane. On the south by the lands of said Willard. And on the west by something river, low water mark. Right? That's the legal description of the property. There's also a little bit in here about there's water rights being transferred also. And then you see the rest of this, the rest of this thing, which, it looks very, very common to us, including this very line, free from every encumbrance, and I hereby engage the warrant and defend the same against all lawful claims, whatever. Right? That's actually what makes a warranty deed a warranty deed. A quitclaim deed, which is really, really sloppy real estate. You should never actually transfer title with a quitclaim deed, is basically saying, I, the seller, are giving you, the buyer, a piece of property, and it's yours. A warranty deed is coming in and says, not only is this words, but I'm going to defend anybody who comes along, your position from anybody else who comes along and says different, right? So this is how title gets transferred, right? And as title gets transferred and goes on, the title officers are the ones who are going back and trying to prove that the person who is selling the house to you, the seller, is actually the honest-to-God owner of the property. And back in the old days, and not that very old, right? Some of the outer counties, the title officers literally went down to the county recorder's office and poured through these books. Now they had an index, right? And the index was set up by the address, and that index in there would say every time the warranty deed got transferred. And you had to watch for stuff, because sometimes, and I've seen this in downtown Phoenix, if somebody wrote up their own warranty deed because they just got one of those warranty deed forms and wrote the legal description wrong, they could literally calve off parts of their property and miss it. There's a section down in downtown Phoenix I found once, that somebody had like 5 acres and he subdivided it all himself, and he was lazy and he didn't write out the little and 12 inches or and 11 inches and 6 inches. He'd just go from this point 151 feet. The original deed said 151 feet and 6 inches. So what you wind up having is these weird little parcels that are still in the original owner's name, that are out there as their own little pieces of land that Maricopa County continues to try to tax. Nobody's paying those taxes, and occasionally somebody dumb comes along and buys a tax lien on those property without actually researching it. And next thing you know, they're a proud owner of a tax lien on a piece of property that's 6 inches wide. Right? But this is what title is doing. They're looking at these. Now they do it a lot different, because let me introduce you, all right, to two of the major problems that came out of this old way of doing it. You notice we mentioned a brook and we mentioned a river. And the river on this thing we mentioned too, the low water mark. Rivers and brooks move over time. And when you are tying a legal description into a moving object like a river, you create terms like alluvium and accretion. And I'm probably pronouncing those things wrong, but the top one, alluvium, is when you get more land because the river moved away from you, or it moved towards you and you have less land. Right? That river decides because of a flood to suddenly carve a new channel 50 feet in your direction. You just lost 50 feet worth of land. And accretion is if it goes the other direction. So this is a problem, and this is why nobody likes legal descriptions that talk like that. But we got saved. But this gentleman right here, Thomas Jefferson. Before Thomas Jefferson got into politics, he was a land surveyor. His father was a land surveyor. They probably talked about land surveying problems and the problems with the rivers and this and that and the other thing, and why you don't tie a legal description in with the old oak tree. And when he was starting a new nation, he decided this is a really good time to start a new way of transferring land. Right? And he came up with a public land survey system. Now, the newfound country, using this new tool called the public land survey system, right, created a starting point. Right? When they picked up the Louisiana Purchase, right, he made sure that they used the public land survey system to start tracking all the property and who owned it and how to go out. Now, the original point, the original landmark, all right, that they started off is located right about here. Right? If you can see it, it's on this little tip of land between West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And they actually have a public marker. Right? Now, here's the funny thing about this that I found. They didn't actually put the public marker in the actual spot. This public marker is actually like it's 1,112 feet due north of where it actually is supposed to be. So we can't actually use this marker as an actual starting point for our references unless you offset by 1,112 feet. So, but this is where the whole thing kicked off, is they started coming up with a grid system to describe land. All right? And that grid system that they use looks really, really complicated when you first look at it. And then once you start learning about it, you realize it's even more complicated than you first thought. Right? But we've divided the lands into tiers and ranges, going off of a baseline and a principal meridian. Now, fun Phoenix fact, Baseline Road is actually on the baseline. And from the principal meridian and the baseline, everything starts blocking off into little squares. These sections right here, these squares are called sections, are 6 miles wide by 6 miles deep. And each little area is a particular little square. Now, actually the little ones are called sections. See, this gets a little complicated. So you start seeing these legal descriptions like section 14 of tier 2 south, right? And then range 4 east, all right? So we go tier 2 south, down 2, and then we go over 4 east, and then you get this point right here. Now, of this, you can break it down even more. All right. Now we have what's called section 14, because this square right here is broken into these separate little sections. All right. Across and down. Little fun fact: section 16 on everyone is the school section. It was put aside in every one of these little townships to specifically provide land to build a school and generate income to pay school teachers, right? So a couple of years ago here in Arizona, you might have seen this news drama coming up where the governor wanted to sell school trust land to pay for schooling. That's literally what that land was set aside for when everything was surveyed out, right? It was always section 16. And they used section 16 because it was the one that's closest to the center, and as everybody else built out around it, that's where the school was going to be. So people could walk to the school and only have to go 4¼ miles. Right? So if your grandfather said that he used to walk to school both ways, 6 miles both ways, he's lying. All right? The most he could have gone was 4.24 miles. Right? If the school was centered exactly right where it needed to be. Right? Then these individual sections got broken down. And so you started doing these descriptions like the northeast quarter, right? Looking right here, any quarter, the northeast quarter of section 14 of township 2 south, range 4 east. And then you can break these things down even more, like this one right here. This is the east half of the southeast quarter, the northwest quarter of section 14, right? T2, R4, or T2S, R4E township. Make sense? You don't have to worry about this stuff unless you're planning on taking the real estate test, and you don't have to remember the stuff 5 minutes after you walk out of there after you've passed a real estate test. But it's going to be on the test, boys and girls. So we could break these things down, and we could break these parcels down. And remember, each one of these things is a mile wide and a mile deep, right? 640 acres to a mile. So this starts really start breaking down and getting complex, all right? But the follow-up thing, the improvement on Thomas Jefferson's idea of how to transfer land, all right, was called the lot and block system. Now, this allowed somebody to sit there and do one massive legal description when they were creating a subdivision. And they would create a map. In the description of this subdivision, every one of these parcels is going to be individually called out. And then it's going to be named Lot 13, or down here, Lot 12. And that description is going to come out. All right, here's a starting line right there, and it's going to have a little number right there that says what the bearing is that you're going to be shooting off there. And then you're going to travel 366.93 feet to this point right here. And then from that point right there, this lot is going to start and go 250 feet along this this bearing to this point right here. And then it's going to follow this line that's already been described to this point right here. And then it's going to follow this line that's already been described to this point right here, which is coming off here. Nobody wants to write that stuff down every time they transfer a house, or right? So all we wind up doing is like, this is Lot 13 of Sunnyvale Estates, right? This made life so much freaking easier. A couple other things I noticed out on this map. You can see right down here. Here's the westerly line of section 13 or section 11. All right, but that actually tells me when I'm looking at this thing, if that's the westerly line, this map is actually not running north and south. All right, and what you're going to see is north is actually going to be the right-hand side of this page. All right, these other little circles right here, all right, these are individual callouts, because if you notice, every one of them is on a curve, and in that big master legal description of this subdivision, the chord or the chine of each one of these curves is going to be described. This is where that trigonometry you didn't pay attention to in school starts coming in. And through all this, we can legally describe what every one of these parcels is and how to get there. Now, one other thing I wanted to point out, and this is something the title is going to be discovering when they're doing the title search. If you notice, each one of these parcels here has road frontage. Each one of them connects to the road. Here's 16. It's got the little driveway line right here. Here's lot 258. It's got a driveway line right there. When you're buying a piece of property, you need to make sure you have access to it. So you're not buying, a plot of land that you can't actually get to. You can only get to it by helicopter. This lot, this subdivision right here, wherever it is, they made sure everybody had access to the house and to this main road. Out in the west and other areas, you might have something called an easement. And the title company, the title officer, when they're doing their searches, is going to see any easements on your property that is being given to another piece of property. So you might actually have an easement saying, yeah, the lot 16 is great and we love it and everything like that. And we're happy that we have this driveway, but we also have 10 feet worth of easement right along this lot line for our own use so we can access on and off. Or you could have something along the lines of, let's say this entire blank area over here on the top of the map is public land. Right? There could be a public easement for a walkway right down this line. You wouldn't see it on the plat map, or if it came in after this map was recorded, or it might have been deeded in earlier, at the same time. But it would come in and say that there is a separate easement that says people can walk on this line and get to the public lands. You do see this here in Phoenix, especially around some of the Mount Preserve areas. Just because, you can't guarantee that just because you're seeing a path through your backyard that people are using to go up on Camelback Mountain or anything like that, that actually is an easement. But your title company is going to let you know whether or not that is. Funny story, it comes directly in the title policy, and getting your title policies. Once upon a time, there was a famous basketball player up in Salt Lake. I'm not going to name his name. All right, I want to protect this guy. All right, because he probably has attorneys. But this gentleman, and very, very famous in the 90s, he was one of the 2 hallmark names of that particular Salt Lake basketball team. Right. In fact, he was so famous, him and his partner had multiple businesses that they owned that was named after their particular play style that everybody knew. If you were following that it was always Joey DeBob, Joey DeBob. Right. And so you'd have Joey DeBob Honda dealership. All right. One of these people, Joey or Bob, was a bit of a dick because he lived on a corner lot, let's say like corner lot 17 over here, all right? And he had an easement for an alleyway across the back of his property that his neighbor, let's say this guy over here at 16, would use the alleyway to pull his RV onto his property. Well, Joey DeBob, Joey here, did not like the fact that his next door neighbor kept driving on that easement. So he went out and bought 2 huge boulders, the kind of boulders you can only buy if you are an NBA superstar, and had them planted directly across that easement to restrict access to it. So guy over here, the next door neighbor, could no longer drive his RV across that. Title company that I worked for at the time got involved in this because they had issued the title policy on the neighbor. When the neighbor bought, and the title policy was there to protect the neighbor if anything came up with regards to title. So my title company went to court against famous basketball player, right, to prove no, owner of 16 has an easement across the north end of lot 17, and they get to use that to drive their RV across. Right? That's one of the reasons why you have title insurance. So I don't know how that case ever wound up. I assume that the courts found for the plaintiff, which would have been lot 16, and told the owner of lot 17, basketball player, hey, you got to move those rocks. And at that point, possibly 16 could have gone after basketball player for damages, right? Especially if 16 suddenly had to take his RV and park it in an outside parking lot, and at an RV storage space. That's a valid claim. So that's everything that the title does on the title side of things. So we finished the first 2 parts of section 3. All right, we've discussed title and how you're taking title, and now we've gone into what the title officers actually do in the background, researching the property, making sure there isn't any liens out there, and we've kicked off a whole bunch of instructions to escrow. Escrow is going to be coming in the next couple sections here under additional. They're going to be looking for tax prorations. That's your property taxes that come in on the property. Our taxes are paid in arrears here in Arizona. That means that you don't pay the taxes up front and live in the house. They send you the bill after a certain amount of time has gone by. And if you're really close into a certain time period, like right now, it's August, the taxes for the first half of the year 2021 are about to come due. You're about to get a tax notice in the mail saying, hey, it's time to pay taxes. And to be honest, homeowners don't get this directly. 9 times out of 10, it's going to the lender that you've been paying your mortgage on, because they want to make sure those taxes get paid and that you're not paying the taxes. Next thing you know, you lose title of the property, because taxes actually do take first position above any lien, loan liens. So, but if you're not in the house, if you're not living in that property when the tax bill comes due, the money's got to come from somewhere. So escrow is going to sit there and go, hey, you've been in the property for 252 days at $7 a day. They're going to multiply that all and take it all out on the seller side. So this line, 3E, paragraph 3E in here, is giving them the right to do that. All right. They're also going to wind up calling HOAs, making sure that what the payoffs are going to be to the HOA. They're going to prorate any assessments or fees that are coming down, or deal with any assessment liens if you're a special assessment. And the last thing in there, and I'm sort of skipping around on this, is they're the ones who get to release the earnest money in case there's a breach. Right. Ultimately, the decision falls down on them. Now, they don't like making that decision. They will go way out of their way to not actually cut the check to the seller if the seller is deserving of the check. But you can get it quite simply by going to them, proving them the documentation that the buyer is in breach, right, and showing them line, this paragraph 3F, lines 144 to 148. Hey, that earnest money now belongs to the seller, and then they'll cut the check over to that. And that's paragraph right there, 3F, is what gives them the right and the power to disperse the earnest money as they see fit if there is a breach, or it just gets added to the buyer's side as a credit, and the buyer gets to use it in their purchasing. So this is section 3. This covers title and escrow. I could go on much longer about all the hard work that title and escrow does. People do not know who these guys are. They're working in the backgrounds. Your interaction, if you have any interaction, is usually with the escrow officer or one of the escrow's assistants. But it's those title guys in the background who are doing the research. It's the IT departments, right, making sure that the lights are staying on. It's the file room clerks, which was one of my greatest and favorite jobs back in the day, is maintaining over 500,000 files in 3 different locations and being able to pull them up at any one time. A whole bunch of infrastructure, a whole bunch of stuff that happens on the side, and they're doing the hard work, and this is the section that gives them the job to do that. So next week, when we cover off on this thing, we're going to be going into disclosure. This is where the seller is telling the buyer about the property, so the buyer's not buying a lemon. This is where all of the seller's responsibility starts really coming into play here, the things that they have to do during the middle of the closing. All right, and we're going to start that off next week with the spuds. And there is a reason why I record these over multiple days. Simply because I have no idea what's going to happen from day to day. And, I recorded the numbers and everything on Wednesday. I just recorded the conversation about what's going on with the moratorium today, and it just all builds up and builds up and builds up, and by the time I string them all together, there's probably 40, maybe 50 minutes worth of video we're going to be covering everything. So anyways, for those stalwart few who have hung out, who listened to the tone of my voice for all this time, thank you very much for watching my podcast. I've noticed this week that I have 14 subscriptions, which is a lot more than I thought. I also have people who I know who have told me that they've subscribed, but they don't get any notifications. So apparently on YouTube, not only do you have to click follow, but you also have to click the little bell shape there. All right, so you'll get the notifications that I post these things, but I always do post these things every Thursday night. Follow up on Facebook with links onto that. For those of you who've been staying with me this entire time, thank you very much, and I really appreciate your support. It means a lot to me. So you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you next Thursday.